Hey guys, what is up? And today I have a video that's going to blow most people's minds because I'm a huge fan of KSI. Why KSI's return to boxing has been an unmitigated disaster. Let's get into it. So, KSI came back and fought Alex Wassabi. That was the initial plan, and that was step one in it being a setup disaster. And the reason why I say that is because KSI fought one of the hardest boxers in the YouTube scene, Logan Paul. He got tested by his chin, his cardio, his heart, his technique. Even though it wasn't the greatest, he still got a win, and he still had a war. And after you have a fight like that, I don't think his trainers nor he should be doubting his abilities. And I feel like the whole plan that they've had about bringing him back and fighting really, really beneath him opponents is wrong, because I feel like they almost are treating it as if he's never fought before, when he's fought one of the best, and he's fought one of the hardest. And so we know that he can handle that, and we know that he can survive and compete in that kind of arena. So when when they announced KSI versus Alex Wassabi, I was very against the idea, because Alex had been training for less than a year, had one fight, and would have lost to Deji if Deji threw his hands, but he didn't. And it was very clear that Alex was a stiff, stationary opponent that KSI would have taken out in 2 rounds, or even less, and gotten a knockout. And a lot of people, I think, had, Alex in good standing, but it still wasn't a fight that made sense, because while it would give KSI kind of that bum, easy fight, which, again, he deserves, you're coming back after 3 years, you deserve that, but at the same time, you don't want someone that's not going to teach you anything. And, I think that, Misfits, for, KSI's singular as a boxer, it's been a failure. Misfits has been successful. They put on great shows, they have amazing events, great matchups, and some of the best YouTube boxing fights, changed the game. So the company is good, but KSI is a fighter, not so much. But back to the point that I was saying, I think Alex Wassabi was someone that weighed less than KSI, that KSI wouldn't even need to be technically sound against him. He could just outbox him based on his weight, and I think that Wassabi was not a good opponent for JJ. I think he should have fought Dillon Danis. I said all the way back in May, KSI versus Dillon Danis is the fight to make. And back then, both hadn't fought in 3 years. Dillon would have brought pay-per-views, entertainment. He checked all the boxes. Plus, he was a real fighter. And a lot of these YouTube fans, when they see real fighter, the perception is this is a legit guy. So while Dillon Danis is probably, less of a Dillon Danis is not as good of a boxer as Austin McBroom or Gibb. You know what I mean? Those would be more valid wins than Dillon Danis. But perception is everything. Just like when Jake knew that perception was everything in Ben Askren. Ben Askren had that viral clip of him surviving that huge punches to his chin. He had a chin of granite. But he knew he was a bad boxer, so he knew that the perception was going to be, this guy's not going to get hurt by Jake, but Jake knew his KO power, and he knew that everyone was going to be going for Ben, even though it was clear as day to see that Ben Askren was a terrible fighter. And I think a lot of Jake's success has been built off of people's perceptions of these MMA fighters, when in reality, someone like me, who hasn't been following MMA and wasn't watching with Woodley and Silva and Askren, I just see it and I judge it objectively, and I'm like, this guy isn't a good boxer. I know this guy's huge in the ring and in the cage, but the cage and the boxing ring are two very different things, and I don't think people realized that, and I don't think they understood that, and I think that was a formula that no one would be able to recreate, because now everyone knows that. It's okay, so I couldn't really remake that formula with Dillon Danis, because everyone saw him as Ben Askren 2.0, and that he didn't take it seriously, wasn't training hard, he didn't even have a coach. I mean, it was a whole mess. And obviously Dillon ended up getting taken out. Perception is everything. So for KSI to come back after a 3-year layoff, especially when he's been saying, I've been training, which I do believe, and that he could beat Jake, and he's calling out these other guys, calling them easy, it would have looked well on him to fight Dillon Danis back in the summer. Now, obviously Dillon was going to pull out, even if it was in the summer, so he would have gone in somebody else. I think FaZe Tempo should have been the replacement opponent, because at that point everyone's perception of Tempo was great. But when you look at Tempo, he's very stationary, he's very stiff, and KSI's white punches, KSI could throw a wild shot and knock out FaZe Tempo. Look at this footage of the Kenny fight, the Slim fight. He looked a little bit better in his fight versus Overflow, but FaZe Tempo would get flatlined by KSI, and he's going to this Saturday, because the way he fights is perfect in terms of getting KSI that KO win, which is great, but it's not going to teach KSI anything, and that's an issue, because these fights need to be improving and going from level to level, or at least giving off the perception of that. You know, for Jake, he went from YouTuber to athlete to fighter, when in reality, Nate and Ben were worse than Gib, but the perception was, well, they have these really amazing titles, and we're all in awe of this, so we think he's progressing. So if you're not going to actually do it, at least manipulate your fans. So you could have taken a page out of Jake's book, but I do respect KSI for acknowledging that they were bum fights and acknowledging it and not trying to mislead people. But it does, in the long term, not pay off for you. But yeah, FaZe Tempo was someone that everyone had a really good perception about, that was potentially KSI's next opponent after he knocked out Slim. And so that would have been a really good fight for JJ, mainly because I think it would be an easy fight for him, and seeing as Tempo performed under the lights and FaZe Sensei losing, he would have choked under the pressure, and I think KSI would have gotten an amazing knockout, because FaZe Tempo's stationary, stiff movements, inviting JJ to essentially knock him out, you know, and make it very easy for him to knock him out. And I think that people would have respected that more. And again, back in May and June when KSI came back, there wasn't the Slims, the Salt Poppies, the Woodleys, the Joe Fourneys, you know, they weren't in the cards. We didn't have a lot of people to choose from to begin with. But again, Dillon Danis is someone that's not a good fighter, but that's the point, and at least Dillon, we know, has probably a better chin than Wasabi, and probably is a little bit more experienced, although I do think that Alex and Dillon are probably at the same level. Alex is maybe even a little bit better, but again, it's all about perception. Mams Taylor, I think he's a good guy, but I think he's a bit of an idiot, and I hate to be so blunt, but I'm going to say that he's an idiot, because who in their right mind would pick Swarmz, a rapper who's fat, who's not an athlete, to fight JJ as a replacement opponent? Because even if he did train, he's never fought before. He's not an athlete. There was no good... that decision lacked common sense. And this goes on to the point of Mams Taylor, who I think is an amazing music producer, but he's not a boxing promoter. This is his first time doing it. I don't think he understands the fight game. I don't think he makes the best decisions. In fact, I think he makes decisions that are devoid of logic and devoid of common sense. But then he makes great matchups and good decisions. But I think we need a Vidal, a Leon, someone that's really experienced in the boxing game to come into that team, because I think they've made some really bad decisions that's made them look really bad. And the fact that he hired that guy that had the hate symbol on his chest, and that he didn't even know that, like... I mean, come on, Mams. Like, what are you doing, man? Like, those are two basic common sense decisions in terms of not picking Swarmz and not picking that other guy. And when you make those basic mistakes, I would have been reevaluating Mams' role in this thing, because he's a promoter. He knows money. He doesn't know the fight game and what's right, and you know, he's not meant for this job, you know. And I'm not saying that he couldn't do it, but I just think that he's not ready to be solo. You know, and then we got Pineda, which was just, you know, really not great. And again, those fights with Swarmz and Pineda didn't teach JJ anything. Even though Swarmz was Nate Robinson and Pineda was Askren in terms of abilities, in terms of how they fought, I feel like JJ got the bummest of bum fights, and now he was ready to level up. And so we thought, okay, he called out Tate, he called out Fury, he called out Woodley on the Twitter poll. And so basically, and before we go on, I do want to say that I think that the whole disaster of this started by him taking 3 years off, which again, he totally deserved. He was doing music, he's not ducking, he's not scared. But again, when you take 3 years off and you allow your enemy to progress, you know, you're not going to have the luxury of time. And I think KSI wants to, you know, really bathe and soothe in fighting different opponents and living in the moment and not rushing it, which is very fine. But you did that to yourself, in that you came back too late, a year late. Like, if he came back last year, he would be able to, you know, have, you know, 3 fights and then another 2 and then Jake. But he's on a ticking time bomb that is Jake Paul, and he set a deadline for himself of the end of this year. So and with that in mind, you know, you have to be leveling up and rushing it and being a little bit more risk-taking than you would potentially be, which isn't great, because again, KSI is the face of Misfits boxing. You know, they don't want him to lose or have a bad fight or a bad night and win but look bad. You know, I understand there's a lot of money involved, politics, yada yada yada, But that's why you come back a year earlier. You know, you announced this in 2021, but you didn't come and do this until this year, until 2022. So I think a lot of this is just KSI's fault. Now, when he fought Dylan Dennis, obviously Woodley was the opponent, and we now know that was confirmed. And again, I give props for KSI for doing that. That's the KSI I know, so you have to give him credit for wanting to fight Woodley. But with the weight contract, and I think Woodley wasn't getting the money he wanted, and DAZN cut the budget in half, this really seemed to come down to a weight and a money and a contract issue, which are just typical of boxing and politics in boxing, which I can't believe is coming to the YouTube scene. And it sucks that we now aren't getting the fights that we want based on this and that and this and that. And it's people with agendas, people that think they understand the game. So he was going to fight Tyron Woodley, and then he fought Dylan Dennis because Dylan Dennis, I guess, brought in more pay-per-views, was going to be more entertaining, and was, you know, he wasn't going to be comparing himself to Jake, he was going to be doing his own thing, and I understand all of that logic. While Woodley's not as entertaining, the focus for KSI should not be on making an entertaining fight. It should be about you leveling up. You know, we saw text messages and back in September where JJ was like, "Unleash me, ma'ams, I want a challenge," and talking about Woodley and saying that all these guys are light work. And so when you talk all of this big talk and then you fight the easiest opponent, it makes you look scared, and it makes you, like, that's the worst thing to do in the YouTube boxing scene, and it really has tarnished his reputation. And I criticized Jake for the same thing, even though no one agreed with me. So I think that when you do that thing where you say all these guys are easy, you talk this big talk, there's a guy that wants to fight you, you say you're down, and then you don't, it is a bad look, and you rightfully get hate for it, you know, and there's no defending that. And again, I think that Woodley would bring in pay-per-views, he would bring in money, he would bring in seats, and while it wouldn't be as entertaining, that's not the point. The point is not about, like, KSI should not be caring about anything else but himself. And by that I mean, when he's saying, my next opponent needs to be levels above Swarms and Pineda. A good middle opponent is Woodley, because he's not anything special. He's very stiff, very stationary, not a very good fighter. I think he's YouTube level. And I think KSI would make Woodley look pretty easy. It would be a tough fight, no doubt, but I think that people would be like, oh wow, JJ didn't struggle as much as we thought. But I think that, again, the point of this fight is you leveling up. It's not about the entertainment. And I think KSI's focusing and thinking on the wrong things, and he's not plugged in enough to what the community wants. Because people that, even fans of KSI, criticize him fighting Dylan Dennis because they wanted him to, we want you to succeed. We want you to fight Jake. We want you to prove Jake wrong and his fans wrong when they said you're a duck and you're scared of Woodley, and then you prove them right. Even though your logic made sense, and I don't think KSI was scared of Woodley. I think he would fight him, but I think he was either manipulated or, came to a decision that just didn't make any sense. The Woodley fight would give JJ more credibility, and that's what matters more. It's getting you credibility and testing you and seeing where you really improved. Because Jake, for example, fought bums, and then he fought Woodley. He won both fights, but he looked horrible. His boxing was terrible in those fights, and he went from the guy that could be, the king, and he was still the king because he beat Woodley, but technically, and he would have looked technically better against Woodley if he fought Faye Sensei, or he fought Austin McBroom even, or some really good YouTubers that would have actually tested him. And so the same thing is probably going to happen to KSI, where he's going to fight his next opponent who's going to be a real challenge, and he might still win, but it's not going to look good. And I don't think he understands that, and that it's supposed to be leveling up with each fight, not based on entertainment and what's going to sell pay-per-views and money. It's focusing on the wrong things and not realizing the bigger picture. I think KSI is thinking too smaller picture when he needs to be thinking bigger picture. And the bigger picture is Jake Paul is fighting at the end of this year, is being the best prepared that you can. And if he wants to, build Misfits up and really soak in it, then just don't fight Jake in 2023 and fight him next year. Will look bad for you, but I mean, at this point, I don't see any other option. Again, I think that him not fighting Woodley was a severe mistake that I think will have major repercussions that he will not experience until months down the line. Because again, I don't think he understands that was a perfect test for him, and that's what he needed. And so obviously, Dylan Dennis pulled out, and then we got, before I get onto that, he wasn't going to fight Tommy Fury because Tommy wasn't going to be allowed in the USA, because the fight was going to be in the USA. Totally fine, right? But then it's in the UK. Tommy's in the UK. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, you say it's easy work. it's there, the opportunity's there, and you don't do it, it just looks bad. It's a bad look. And yes, his logic might be very sound and it's understandable, but he's not focusing on the bigger picture, and he's actually derailing and throwing himself off a cliff by making decisions based on entertainment and all of this stuff rather than making decisions based on what's best for him as a fighter. And then, he obviously was going to fight Willie, and that didn't happen. So then that could have been a potential fight for JJ after Dylan pulled out. And then there was Slim, who I think is not very overrated, who KSI would get out in 2 rounds or less, or 3 rounds, or you make light work of Slim. And I know no one wants to say that or believe that, but it's true. Like, Slim is very overrated. He's good, don't get me wrong, but he's overrated. He would not be able to compete with KSI, or even Gib. Poor cardio, windmills more than KSI, prime for a knockout. And some with KSI's experience, it just would be, not worth it, in my opinion. Because I think he's above these YouTubers. Again, perception-wise is what matters. Right timing is everything. And timing-wise, it makes sense to fight Slim. And there is no threat to KSI losing that fight. And even looking back, I know he said he didn't want to have a win, but it'd be scrappy. But it wouldn't be scrappy. Because Slim is prime for JJ to beat very good technically for various reasons, but that's just my opinion. There was Joe Fournier, who Ma'am said was going to be the replacement, and it didn't end up happening because money and and again, I think Joe was a bit of a leap. So I can understand why they wouldn't want to do that, but when you say I'm gonna fight this guy and then you don't, and you say he's easy, you just look scared. You just look like a coward. You look like a hypocrite, and you get hated on and criticized for it. So Joe Fournier was the perfect opponent, and I think KSI would beat him. I don't know how, because he shouldn't be able to beat him, because he's a good fighter, and I think he's better than JJ. But he would beat him, just like Jake would beat Tommy. How, I don't know, but he would. And it would give him one up on Jake. He would have one up on Jake. He would have fought a legit pro boxer, and he would have had one up against Jake, and that's what's super important, and he just doesn't get that. And he goes with Face Tempo. Face Tempo is, again, I told you, is primed for JJ to knock out, and I do understand KSI's logic of he's a southpaw, and you want someone, if they're going to be a replacement, to have the same fight style, have the same height, kind of fight similar in Faze and Dylan are very similar, so it is fair, it would be unfair to JJ, and if they have someone that is that perfect opponent, they're going to put KSI with them. So I completely understand that. I think the audience should understand that and get where he's coming from, because there is some logic behind that. However, I do think that it gave JJ a perfect opportunity to fight, a Woodley, a Joe Fournier, a Slim. Those 3 guys would have really tested JJ, and he's ready for them. And I think he said that his trainers told him, well, you fought Southpaw, so why would you fight an Orthodox fighter? But then I'm thinking, what's KSI's actual opinion on this? Because Mams told IFL TV, like, JJ said it last week, I guess I'm fighting Joe. And Leon even tweeted, KSI will fight anyone. He's not scared of anyone. It's his management team and his coaches that will make that decision. Which is kind of what I've been saying, is that his coaches, his management team, I think some are manipulating and milking him for money and they don't care about him. But I think a lot of the time they all have good intentions, but they make poor decisions that are devoid of logic and common sense. And they honestly come off like idiots. And they don't know what the boxing scene is like. And so, again, I truly think that they've screwed up in a lot of ways, because KSI's reputation is in shadows right now. Like, I don't care what anyone says. That to me is what I feel like. And, like, his Twitter space with Jake Paul was just, I mean, he looked really bad, and there wasn't anything major on the Twitter space, because, I mean, a lot of it you guys have seen, so there's nothing huge to cover there, except that the fight is going to happen in November or December of the end of the year. KSI was given a perfect opportunity to rectify a mistake, and he made another mistake. Wade Plemons, great guy, but he said that Slim could be JJ's next fight, and I swear to God, if that's the next fight, JJ is screwed, because if he goes from Slim to Jake, at that point, I can't defend him. At that point, he's lost. He's become a clown. Like, and I don't know why Wade would say that he doesn't need to fight a Joe or Tyler, because he absolutely does. He absolutely does. And if anyone thinks not, then they have a new, then they don't know boxing. Or in Wade's case, they're not getting paid off, but they're a little bit more neutral and a little less critical and playing it a little bit more safe, because they don't want to lose their job on Misfits. And I know people are going to be like, it's not true, but they do that. But you know what? It's very easy to be neutral, to keep your job, to not stir the waters too much, to not make a lot of ripples. It's very easy to do that. So, we got Tommy Fury, Tate, Fournier, Woodley, Slim. 5 opponents that KSI had the potential to fight, and it all just went away. So when you've had 5 people that people were genuinely interested in, and probably more like 4 because of Tate, but your Fury, Fournier, Slim, Tyron Woodley, and you don't end up taking those fights, especially when you've had so many opportunities to fight them. Like, he was able to fight Woodley in August, he was able to fight Woodley now, he was able to fight Woodley when Dennis pulled out. He could have fought Tommy next, or when Dennis pulled out, he could have fought Tommy when Dylan pulled out. He could have fought Slim instead of Dennis. You know, he could have fought Slim now. So he's just had all these chances, and I just think, I feel bad for the guy, but I think he's making very poor decisions. At the end of the day, if this isn't a disaster, I don't know what is. I have to define it as a disaster, because your reputation's in shadows, and it's just a mess. It's just a mess, and it's poor management. And I really hope he fights Joe, Fournier, or Woodley next. And if anything, you should fight Woodley and Fournier, and then fight Jake, which would be a lot on KSI, but at this point, he's done it to himself. There's nothing really else to say, you know. LSI, what can I say?